Chapter 9. Spite lowered on his haunches and leapt again, rear legs clawing for purchase on the frozen leafy ground. The talons of his left hind leg caught on a thin sapling. For a moment the green wood held, then splintered under the huge beast's weight. The cold one started to slide again, and Malus threw himself against Spite's hindquarters, pushing for all he was worth. The wary Noglier leapt as though stung, whipping about and snapping at the highborn in irritation. Dagger-like teeth clashed shut less than a foot from Malus's face, spraying him with thick tendrils of poisonous slime. Malus snarled and punched the cold one full on the nose, and the beast whipped back around with a roar, stomping further up the slope. The highborn wiped his face and thanked the Dark Mother that they'd at least managed to climb a little further up the hill. It had been 2 days since the terrible encounter on the Spear Road, and Malus doubted that they'd covered more than 10 miles in the rugged, densely wooded terrain of the Dragonspine foothills. Each night the warband made camp wherever they happened to be when the weak sunlight faded from the cloudy sky. Each time they built a small fire and roasted some of their precious store of meat, and each time they laid out a generous portion on a plate in a place of honour, hoping that one of the Hildruki would accept the invitation and enter the camp. So far, the Shades had kept to themselves. Malus was certain that they were out there. The legend said that when the Druki came to Nagaroth, some 2,000 men, women and children turned their backs on the great black arcs and the nascent great cities, travelling instead into the mountainous wilderness to live according to their own laws. No one knew how many had survived those first few years in the pitiless land of Chill, but it was well known that the Arturi, the Shades, claimed much of the mountain country north of Hagrafe as their own, and did not suffer intruders lightly. At various times he'd felt his scalp prickle with the undeniable sensation that they were being watched. But not even a Noglier smelled any threat nearby. For whatever reason, the hillfolk were keeping their distance. Privately, Malus hoped that the Arturi would take their invitation soon. After only 2 days in the hills, he'd begun to seriously consider heading back for the road and taking his chances with Uriel's riders. Hour after hour of steep slopes, frozen ground and treacherous underbrush had sapped the warband's strength. The Noglier were hungry and irritable, because Malus had been forced to ration their meat. Each beast could easily consume a full-grown deer or a human body each day, and the highborn was very leery of sending out hunting parties when the risk of ambush was so great. The warband bore the condition stoically, though more than once Malus had caught sight of Dalvar whispering quietly among Nagaira's other retainers. It could be nothing, but he couldn't afford to take that chance. The question, Malus thought, is what could he do about it? Spite paused, and Malus suddenly realized that they had reached the top of the slope. He reached out and tugged on the beast's thickly muscled tail. "Stand!" he commanded, a little breathlessly, and the cold one eagerly complied, snowflakes steaming off its scaly hide. Malus clambered up alongside the cold one, and saw that the trees were considerably thinner on the reverse slope, affording a good view of the next hill over and the small vale in between. In the far distance he could see the dark, broken teeth of the shield wall, the huge east-west mountain range that marked the beginning of the frontier. "Leagues and leagues away," Malus thought tiredly. "It'll take 1,000 years to get there at this pace." The crackle of brush behind him brought Malus's head around. Dalvar clambered up alongside him, using a roughly carved cedar stick for support. The Druki's normally smug face was flushed and worn. "It will be dark soon," the retainer said, leaning a little on his makeshift staff. "The men are exhausted, Dreadlord, and the Noglier besides. If we make camp now, we might have a little light left over to hunt for some fresh meat." Malus shook his head. "No hunting, Dalvar. and not lose men to artillery crossbows. He indicated the vale below. There is some clear ground down there, and what looks to be a stream. We'll set up camp there. Dalvar surveyed the vale wearily. We'll get weaker every day at this pace. Soon the archery won't need to pick us off one by one. They'll just send their striplings in to round us up with willow switches. City living has made you soft, Malus said with a snort. Right now, the Shades are testing us, gauging our strength. Each day sees us a few miles deeper into their domain. As long as we keep our force together and afford them no opportunity for easy ambushes, the Shades will have to choose a different tactic. And accepting our invitation is the simplest and easiest option available. They know we're interested in talking with them. Sooner or later, they're bound to become curious. It was well known that, like any Druki, the Arturi had a mercenary streak. Shades served wealthy warlords as hired scouts and skirmishers, and when the Witch King rode to war, entire tribes of Shades marched in the vanguard and claimed their share of the plunder. Or they could simply wait until we're too weak from hunger to fight back and take us all captive. Your man Van here says that the Arturi bargain only when they have no other choice. You've been talking to Van here, have you? How disquieting, the Highborn mused. I'll have to have a talk with Lenara about that. If they ambush us as a group, we can fight them off, possibly even kill one or more of them. They're excellent woodsmen, but they lack good armor, and we have the Norglir on our side. The Cold Ones will warn us if they catch the scent of a large ambush party. No, I think we still hold a slight advantage here if we stay disciplined. Dalvar gave Malus a long look that was frankly doubtful, if not outright challenging. Then, I suppose we'll see what the night brings, he said, then turned and made his way carefully back down the slope. Malus watched him go. Tread carefully, Dalvar, he said. The footing here is more dangerous than it appears. Thank you for the warning, Dreadlord, the rogue replied over his shoulder. You do well to remember that yourself. You're going to have to die, Dalvar, Malus thought, and it's going to have to happen soon, unless I can find a way to discredit you in the eyes of your men. But how? Up! Malus commanded, slapping Spite's flank. It's downhill from here, and then you can rest. The Norglir lurched forward, muscles bunching in its shoulders and hips as it negotiated its way down the slope. Malus had to jog to keep pace, until suddenly the Cold One let out a barking roar and broke into a run. Spite! Stand! He called, but the Norglir sped on, head low and tail stiff as a spear. He's hunting, Malus realized. What's he got wind of? A deer? Then, farther upslope, he heard the other Norglir take up the roar as well, and Malus suddenly realized he was in the path of a multi-ton stampede. Thinking quickly, the Highborn cut to the left and slightly back upslope, knowing that there weren't any trees or boulders large enough to protect him from an out-of-control Cold One. He could only get out of the way as much as possible and hope for the best. The hillside shook with dozens of pounding feet. The Norglir, being pack animals at heart, thundered down the slope in a single lumbering mass, kicking up a huge cloud of powdery snow as they went. In their wake scrambled their owners, clambering down the hill and shouting ineffectual commands at the galloping beasts. Under other circumstances, it might even have been amusing, but suddenly Malus felt very vulnerable indeed. A deer wouldn't have set them off like this, he reasoned. Not the entire pack. They only responded like that when they were hungry and there was blood in the air. Someone's baited them, he thought. There's probably a fresh deer kill in the copse of trees, its body opened to the cold air. Malus felt his guts turn to ice. He saw that the Noglir were already halfway across the small meadow at the bottom of the hill, galloping for a small copse at the far end. The Druki were in hot pursuit, running lightly across the snowy field. The warrior in the lead suddenly stumbled and fell. A heartbeat later, the Druki behind him collapsed. Then the third warrior in line spun in a half circle, and this time Malus caught the blurred flight of the blunted crossbow bolt that struck the man in the centre of the forehead and dropped him to the snow. The ambushers were firing from the dense tree line on the opposite side of a winding stream bed, and Malus's men had nowhere to hide. There was a faint scuffling sound behind him. Malus whirled, his sword springing from his scabbard, and caught the knobbed end of the Arturi's club right between the eyes. Someone was forcing a thin, bitter liquid down his throat. Malus gagged and spat, jerking his head violently away from the wooden tube that was being pushed between his lips. Emotion set a flare of agony blooming behind his eyes, and his stomach roiled. A calloused hand grabbed him by the jaw, and despite the awful sickness, he jerked his head once more and snapped at the offending hand, sinking his teeth deep into the flesh between forefinger and thumb. He tasted blood, and his stomach finally betrayed him. The hand pulled free as he retched a thin stream of bile, and then the blackness behind his eyelids exploded with white fire as a fist smashed into his cheek. The next thing he felt was a blade against his cheek. It was cold, rough and sharp, and he cried out in fury as it was slowly drawn against his skin, slicing easily through into the flesh beneath. The white-hot pain sharpened his senses into full awareness. He blinked his eyes as warm blood leaked down his face, and when he could focus, he saw the silhouette of a short, lean-limbed Druki standing before him. The shade's sharply angled features were covered in spiral tattoos of indigo and red, giving him a snarling, demonic expression, even when in repose. When he leered at Malus, his face was the very image of otherworldly hate. The man wore layers of loose robes and soft leather boots, and an assortment of daggers protruded from a wide belt at his waist. He was backlit by a roaring fire that illuminated a small clearing, surrounded by a circle of trees. More of the shades crouched or paced around the roaring flames, most wearing cloaks of mottled greens and browns that blended artfully with the shadows of the forest. Each Druki in Malus's warband was tied to one of the surrounding trees, as he was himself. It was difficult to focus, despite the pain. It was full dark, with both moons shining in an unusually clear sky. Malus tried to think. How long was I out? Hours? Days? He tried to concentrate, tried to summon up the fires of his anger. Misbegotten runt! Is this how you treat an embassy of the great Volcar of Haggrave? The shade cocked his head at the highborn's outburst. Then, with a smile, he brought the knife to his lips, and licked the blood from its edge. His eyebrows rose appreciatively, and he turned to his compatriots, speaking in such thickly accented Druhir that Malus couldn't understand a single word of. The men around the fire laughed, and the highborn didn't like the sound. Have a care, my lord. The short one likes the way you taste. With an effort, Malus forced himself to turn his head towards the sound of the voice. Van Heer was bound to the tree immediately next to Malus, his face a mass of purple bruises. He spoke with effort through swollen lips. The blood and flesh of highborn warriors is a delicacy to the hill clans, so I wouldn't mention your father quite so forcefully if I were you.
You're mad! They wouldn't eat their own kin!
Van Heer managed a pained laugh. We aren't their kin. We're city folk, and prisoners besides. We're just meat to them. Fat and soft, like those Bretonians were to us. There was a rattle and clink of metal near the fire. Malus looked and saw one of the shades unfolding a roll of soft leather, sewn with a number of different-sized pockets. A bone or wood handle protruded from each pocket. As the highborn watched, the short artillery drew forth a pair of flinting knives and a well-polished bone saw. If you're lucky and they've eaten recently, we might settle for just a hand or a forearm, Van Heer said. They're very good at taking only what they need for keeping the victim alive for later. The short artillery spoke, and several of his fellows went to work. One shook out a length of rope and looped it over a sturdy branch hanging near the fire. Another shade took the end of the rope and walked over to Malus, looping the cord around the highborn's ankles in a few swift practice strokes. Two others untied the bonds that held Malus to the tree, leaving his hands bound tightly behind his back.
You wouldn't dare! Malus roared. Touch me again with your filthy knives, and by the mother of eternal night, I will call a curse down on you that will blight these hills for 1,000 years!
The short artillery made a disgusted sound and barked a short command. Two of the shades hauled on the rope, and Malus was hoisted upside down, his body swinging perilously close to the fire. Rough hands stopped his pendular motion, and another shade set a large brass bowl underneath his head. Malus watched the short artillery pull a sickle-shaped knife from the leather cloth. His body was trembling like a plucked wire, seething with a white-hot rage.
Kill me, and the Valkyr of the Hag will hunt you and your kind to extinction!
The shade stepped close and smiled, showing a mouth full of jagged teeth. You are nothing but smoke, high man. In a moment, puff, you will be gone as though you had never been. Your Valkyr will never know what became of you. The knife was cold as ice against Malus's throat.